we are now going to dive into the program. So I'll turn it back over to Dahlia. Thank you for being here.
And thank you, Emily. You'll see by this slide that we are going to have a presentation of the exhibition by our colleague Liz Munsell, followed by a small discussion forum for questions and comments, answers. If there's time and interest, we're going to use the breakout room function in Zoom, and we will end our session with some information and a survey that we would be delighted to get your feedback on. And the feedback that you provide for us will help tremendously in future programming. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge our funders that have helped support Writing the Future, Basquiat and the Hip Hop Generation. This exhibition would not be possible without their support. The support of Bank of America, one of the MFA's longstanding partners. Additionally, the exhibition has been supported by the Robert and Jane Burke Fund for Exhibitions, the Darwin Cordoba Fund, and the Amy and Jonathan Pourvu Fund for the Exhibition of Contemporary Art and Sculpture, and the Museum Council Special Exhibition Fund. So we are very, very delighted to have their support, and we are also delighted at this point to introduce our colleague Liz Munsell. Liz Munsell is the Lorraine and Alan Bressler Curator of Contemporary Art at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, where she's organized dozens of exhibitions and new commissions with emerging and overlooked artists. She established the MFA's first performance art program and has worked to bring increased diversity to the museum's collections, exhibitions, and programs. Between 2012 and 2017, Munsell held a visiting curator post at Harvard University's David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies. She is currently a member of the Board of Advisors to the Cisneros Fontanes Art Foundation. Her writings have been published in print and online publications such as MoMA's Post, Notes on Modern and Contemporary Art Around the Globe, and artforum.com. So I invite you to join me in welcoming Liz to present on this really terrific exhibition. And Liz, I invite you to share your screen. I'm going to exit sharing screen here and invite you to share your screen.
Thank you so much, Dahlia. I'm so excited to be here with you all today to present to you on Basquiat and the hip hop generation. Can everyone hear me okay? I was having some audio issues before. Just give me a thumbs up if you can.
We can hear me.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. I am going to give you about a 40-minute long presentation on this exhibition that I hope will acclimate you, get you comfortable with some of the material, and then I'm super excited to take questions at the end that are suited to your specific age groups of your students. And I just want to say, as the mother of a young child myself, dealing with the pandemic as you all are as educators, we may get interrupted by her screaming at some point. And I'm also so grateful to you for all of your work of connecting our exhibition with children and university audiences as well. So with that, I will start the presentation here. Let me know if anything goes awry with technology, as everything seems to be going awry these days. We began this exhibition about 3 years ago. As you can imagine, a lot of work goes into sourcing the specific works that we need in order to tell a specific story. And so at the start of the pandemic, this picture was taken the Friday that we shut down to the public. We had been due to install the following Monday and to open the show April 1st. So as you can imagine, it's been a long road. All of the works, almost all of the works, were already in through our doors. These are paper mock-ups that you can see that we began to install with before we shut down. And all the works just stayed in crates safely in our galleries. Luckily, they had already gotten through our doors before the pandemic hit. Otherwise, we might not have the exhibition on view today. And we spent, the next few months adjusting the exhibition design from this floor plan to this, which is just slightly adapted to allow for a more open space so that visitors could socially distance as they flowed through the show along with others in the public, just to give you an idea of how the exhibition feels in terms of density and rhythm. It is sort of spaced out, and I think a really wonderful experience in person. So I know this is a virtual presentation, but as much as I can say, please come through our doors physically if you can, if you feel comfortable, as we've done a lot of work, I think, with all the safety precautions around COVID. So to jump into the content of the show, we start the exhibition with a focus on the graffiti era that really introduces the work by the 12 artists in this exhibition. As you descend the stairs into Gund Gallery, if you've been to the MFA, you have likely made this voyage. When my co-curator for this exhibition, Greg Tate, who is a founding figure of hip hop journalism, a writer and musician himself, came to visit Gund Gallery to see the space we were going to have the show, and he went down these stairs and said, it's like going down into the subway. So our exhibition designers really ran with that and decided to create an atmosphere in the exhibition foyer that felt like the subway, and really to work with the scale. I'm going to play a little video here. In order to know the large scale public art context in which these very young artists were working with such ambition when they decided to take over the New York City subway with their work in the mid 70s and into the early 80s. So this foyer allows us to introduce the basic concept of what was then a nascent culture called hip hop culture. And it was not just the rap that we associate with the term hip hop with today, but it was also a multidisciplinary culture that incorporated a visual arm, which was graffiti, break dancing, which I know you just saw on the screen, and DJing, in addition to emceeing and rapping. And of course, there is the other element of hip hop culture, which is fashion and style as well. So this multidisciplinary culture that was developing really in street corners in the outer boroughs of New York City and uptown began to converge in the early 1980s downtown in a community of other very experimental artists who were coming out of punk rock. And that was an environment in which so many people across many cultural lines were able to flourish and to express themselves kind of no matter where they were coming from. So we have this introductory space where we talk about graffiti culture and this incredible platform of the subways that the 12 artists in the exhibition, Basquiat included, took over as a platform for their voice, very much in the context of New York City's economic collapse in the 1970s. Many of the cityscapes that inspired their work and that were the context for their work were incredibly run down. They did not have many resources available to them in terms of art classes, art supplies, and yet they came up with this ingenious idea to take over the subway system in order to reach tens of thousands of people a day with their art. Now, all of that is when they are incredibly young. Most of the artists who are doing all that were teenagers when they came up with this idea and were part of this culture. And it happens that in the early 80s, the New York City Transit authorities are erasing these wonderful works on the trains with more vigor than ever. And the artists now coming into their 20s decide, hey, we'd really like to find a different platform for their work. So they come into the gallery context. And the movement, the graffiti movement that we've been talking about, really transitions into being a post-graffiti movement. The works that they begin to make absolutely reference the city and all the things that they were referencing when they were working on trains, such as comic book culture, spacescapes that were common through to experience through movies like Star Trek and Battlestar Galactica. All that is now coming into their works, but on a different format, which is canvas or sculpture or clothing. And so this is the now clearly through the exhibition design, contemporary art gallery context in which their work begins to unfold in the early 80s. This painting is by Lee Quinones. It celebrates the graffiti crew, the Fabulous Five, from which he came. The crew was famed for painting a 10-car, all 10 cars of a subway line. And this is a relatively small canvas, 50 by 69 inches, that he decides to paint on the occasion of his the first exhibition of graffiti art internationally, which happened in Rome in very, very late November, December 1979. And this now portable format of canvases can be enjoyed and collected by audiences abroad. When Lee and Fab Five came home from exhibiting in Rome, their community of fellow graffiti artists and writers were so excited about the prospect of having an audience to appreciate their art abroad, when, of course, in the New York City context, their works on trains continued to be destroyed back at home. This is a work by Basquiat that we've paired alongside the Fab Five Freddy. You can see the similarities. They're referencing of comic book culture, the lightning bolts, the stars. They are really, and it's being held up by our paintings conservator very carefully, who got to hang this relatively delicate work that was made with found molding from borrowed surely from some sort of construction site's trash. And I include this work just to note the materials that these artists were using. Even though they were working in the gallery context, they were absolutely continuing to ensure that the streets formed a part of their artistic vocabularies by using things like found objects, sourced from the street as their materials. Another view of the Fun Fridge, which was a permanent fixture in the Fun Gallery, which was the first gallery to give these artists solo exhibitions, insisting it's not just like graffiti, this huge anonymous body that's taken over the city. These are individual artists with individual styles that really emanate the styles from their tags. Their tags, their signatures are the building blocks for their larger works, whether they be on canvas or on trains. This is a collective work by Jean-Michel, Fab Five Freddy, Eero, LA2, and many of the artists in the exhibition. It also introduces the idea for the art history buffs in the room here, that just like Marcel Duchamp in 1919 elevates a urinal to the realm of art via just his signature, his pseudonym, these artists declare that they can make art out of anything just via their names, their tags. We also have a documentary on view and a small tube gallery in the exhibition. This is Graffiti Post-Graffiti, produced to include interviews with almost all of the artists in the show. This documentary, as well as several films, are available for view on our website. It's about 30 minutes long. It's an excellent reference and really fun to watch to give context to the exhibition. The next gallery is portraiture, and we'll spend a bit of time here because this is the only gallery in the show that is only Basquiat. Throughout the rest of the exhibition, we really wanted to put Basquiat alongside his peers' works. But this show, Basquiat is in this room. Basquiat is in the title. We wanted to give him a moment that was all his own. We also wanted to ensure that we focused in on Basquiat's portraiture, a real turning point in this exhibition. And one of the primary reasons for the selection of artists in the show is that Basquiat painted the portraits not just of jazz musicians and major figures in sports such as Muhammad Ali or Hank Aaron, which is well known about his work, that he was really responsible for the portraits of major Black cultural producers over history, and that he painted Black figures because he did not see them. He did not see Black figures hanging in the halls of the Museum of Modern Art or the Brooklyn Museum where he frequented with his mother. Is that he also decided to paint the portraits of his fellow Latinx and Black artists who were his peers and his interlocutors in the post-graffiti movement. Basquiat is often kind of painted as this sole Black genius figure in a very white art world. And while he is indisputably, I think, a genius artist, he was not the only artist of color who was trying to break into these spaces dominated by white artists and gallerists. And that is why we have decided to show his work alongside his peers. And it's absolutely the first time in museum history that this has happened. So we've dedicated this gallery to the portraits he made of his peers of color who are also artists and who are also artists in our exhibitions. So I wanted to take a moment to focus in on Hollywood Africans, which is a very important work in Basquiat's overall body of work that focuses in on an image of Basquiat, a self-portrait, alongside his peer artists, Ramelzi and Toxic, who are both artists in our show. Basquiat created this work on the occasion of having traveled to Los Angeles for a solo exhibition with Larry Gagosian Gallery, a very, very important and now mega gallery in the art world. It was a big deal for him to have this solo exhibition. It was his first on the West Coast. And in order to celebrate it and also make a statement in the West Coast art world, he invited his friends and fellow artists, Ramelzi, Toxic, and others, to come with him on this journey. So he titles the work Hollywood Africans, incorporates in it references through this 1940 date at the top of it, as well as of course the title of the work and this Oscar figurine here. He is referencing film history and the year 1940 that Hattie McDaniels became the first African American to receive an Academy Award for her performance on film. So he's both noting this history of Black struggle in the arts for recognition, the limited roles which Black artists are allotted to play on film, and also the limited roles that he is expected to play as one of the sole Black artists in the art world of the 1980s. Of course, he did his part to bring his fellow artists alongside him to change that. And this portrait is a very important recognition of that moment. You will also note in the bottom half of the work here that Basquiat takes his own hand, very, very likely his own hand, and kind of presses across the wet paint of the canvas and ends that gesture, that impression that he makes in the paint at his own hand in the portrait, which he labels paw. So we have not just a painting here in oil and oil stick, but also this sort of performative gesture, really getting himself, the impression of his body into the work. And he labels himself here to the right, self-portrait as a heel, number 3. There are 2 self-portraits of a heel, as you might guess. This is what he's calling the 3rd. A heel, of course, being the villain character in a professional wrestling match, which is, of course, a sort of theatrical production in and of itself. One professional wrestler plays the heel, the other the hero. So he's sort of playing the bad boy here with his entourage, and incorporating other terms throughout the canvas, heroism as well as gangsterism, a term that many artists, including the incredible jazz musician Jason Moran, who teaches over at the New England Conservatory, has named a track after this term. So coining many terms that are specific to this cultural context, but would resonate with Black artists in particular for years to come. So there's a certain ideology of the post-graffiti moment that I think Basquiat is articulating in this canvas. We use this moment in the show to introduce Ramel Z, one of the most important artists in articulating what graffiti was, and that graffiti was indeed a movement. And Toxic, one of the younger artists in this show, who for whom Basquiat really served as a mentor. Toxic served as Basquiat's occasional studio assistant, and said in an interview that we did with him that his words, and that Ramel Z's words, and that many of the artists in the show who were his friends, who frequented his studio, all of their words could be found in Basquiat's canvases. So you can pick apart many different references in this work. How to source them, and really pin down where they came from is a whole nother thing. Because in addition to Basquiat's friends being in his studio talking and their words getting into the canvases, Basquiat also worked with the television on, with music on, and looking through magazines and books. So all of that, this real multitude of sources and references enter into the work. So if you pick apart any additional references here, I would love to hear them. I'll just add one more. We have in the left corner this 200 yen written in pink oil stick, and yen, of course, referring to the Japanese currency, speaks to the commodification of both Basquiat's work and all of the artists' work who were seeking to enter the art market and did so effectively in the 1980s. And then the crowns, one more, there's a lot. The crown that you see above that inscription, Basquiat was asked in an early 80s interview, why do you paint crowns? And he said, everyone paints crowns. Of course, referring to the fact that all of these artists coming from the subway context, only the best of them were the kings of the line and could paint the crowns on their subways. So next work, just to finish off on the portraiture gallery, we'll move quickly. It won't take as deep a dive on every work, I promise. This is a portrait of Iro, also one of the younger artists in the exhibition, for whom Basquiat served as a mentor, and he has a major work in the next gallery we'll see. And here are the portraits on plates drawn in marker that Basquiat made of some of the other artists in the show. LA2, Lady Pink, Keith Haring, Fab Five Freddy, and Futura. This is a wonderful portrait of Anthony Clark, aka A1, who was very much part of Ramel Z's entourage and crew riding on the subways, but was also very close to Basquiat, and Basquiat painted a number of portraits of him, at least 3 that we know of, and this one is the best in my opinion. Here's a close-up of it. It is also on these kind of fence slats, again, this idea of getting materials, found materials, diverse materials, materials sourced likely from trash piles in the streets, getting the streets into the work via the material choices. It also has these wonderful color Xerox collaged onto it. Color Xerox was a very new technology at the time that the artists were super excited about, and it really enabled Basquiat to develop a repertoire of imagery that he repeated through many works, beginning in 1984, 1985, and through to his death in 1988. So this is the room that really cements the idea that Basquiat is not this lone wolf out there in this white art world, but that he was surrounded by his friends who he brought along with him on his mission to make his work known in the world and to ensure that more diverse perspectives and more diverse artists could be appreciated in the fine art world. I'm going to skip over that one in the interest of time, but I'm happy to take questions on it. Writers is our next gallery, and this gallery focuses in on the individual styles of almost all the artists in the show. So the lighting gets darker and it's kind of spotlit so that you can really hone in on each work and all that each artist brings to their canvases or panels in some cases as well. This is the kind of grand vista at the end of the gallery. It's two Keith Haring and LA2 columns that they have jointly embellished. The two worked alongside each other. Keith Haring filling in with his more symbolist vocabulary of the babies and the televisions and the angels and the pyramids. He's definitely one of the more figurative artists in this show. And then LA2 working just outside his lines with his more calligraphic lettering, which is often associated with more Eastern calligraphy. And at the center is this monumental 13-foot tall painting by Eero, whose portrait you got to see in the last gallery. Eero did not work consistently over time. He really ended his career mostly in the 80s. This is his most monumental and important work that he ever created. And when you get to see it in person, you'll know that not only is it a standout work from afar with this incredibly bold color palette, of course, spray paint, enamel paint is, used on metal often and in design for its capacity to shine, to pop. I think surpasses other paint such as oil, but that is debatable, of course. And so not only is it a statement piece from afar, it is up close a very important experience of engraving in fresh spray paint. And this diversity of techniques that Eero utilized, I think, has been under-recognized and underappreciated in terms of thinking about how these artists worked with spray paint. Yes, they were absolutely taking the can and spraying, but they were also flipping the can to the other side and using the rounded edges of the bottom of the can to create shapes, circular shapes in their work. So there was a variety of techniques that really play out, and this work is a great example of how they do so. Also in this room is a video that documents Basquiat's personal style of graffiti. Basquiat from 1977 to 1979 worked alongside his fellow artist and high school classmate Al Diaz as the duo Samo. and they worked anonymously for a number of years. Everyone knew their lettering and their phrases because they were incredibly distinctive with this three-lined E and very square font, and also for how poetic and clever and political the things that they wrote were. So it was an anonymous statement, but very strategic in the way that Basquiat and Aldiaz chose to put these phrases outside of art galleries where a certain crowd would notice them. And the two came forward in the Village Voice to say who they were, really to shock the downtown scene, who imagined that this was the work of a much more seasoned, older conceptual artist and not the brainchild of two young teenagers. So Samo was absolutely heralded as one of the most important graffiti statements in the downtown scene. We also have on view in this gallery a number of notebooks, sometimes called black books when they belong to artists who were really embedded in the subway graffiti culture. And this is a format that's small scale and very personal, where artists would play out their ideas, their shapes, their palettes in this intimate format before translating those ideas onto the street in a larger scale scenario. So we have Basquiat and Lady Pink and Lee Quinones's notebooks on view here. And we have, I'll just finish with a focus on the individual styles of these artists. This is Fab Five's very bold logo of sorts, the golden five, and Lady Pink's bubble letter name stretching up from the bottom to the top of this canvas in her much more figurative approach to lettering. And Toxic, very abstracted ransom note painting in which he adds his tag in several areas of the canvas, but also references Samo and Basquiat through this CEE lettering in 3 lines here as well. So their individual styles absolutely had to distinguish them in a sea of other artists working in graffiti and then post-graffiti, but they are absolutely referencing each other and supporting each other and encouraging each other's individual styles to develop. So for the art history nerds in the room, I'll make a brief mention of our timeline area that charts the most important exhibitions of post-graffiti art. All of these artists were exhibiting together in group exhibitions across the US in commercial galleries, but also in museums and galleries in Europe, where their work was much more frequently collected and embraced by institutions. Many US museums sort of missed the boat on collecting and supporting these artists because of the stigma that they had of being associated with graffiti. That was not such an issue in Europe. This timeline is available on our exhibition webpage as well for those who want to dive in. So the bigger scale statement also of this focus on film and music, and noting that the artists in this show are the visual arm of hip hop culture, still a very nascent culture, but they experiment with other areas of artistic creation, such as film and music, and this room and fashion as well, as you can see here. So this room, via the big screen, you can see to the far right of the image, Blondie's Rapture video, in which the pop star Debbie Harry raps for the first time on national television in the music video for their song Rapture. And she calls out Fab Five Freddy and Grandmaster Flash and others who are part of hip hop culture, and gives that culture a platform on the national stage for the first time in 1981. We also have clips on this screen from the movie Wild Style, which is one of the first movies to kind of chart the connections between DJing, emceeing, graffiti, and breakdancing. And having these expressions on film allowed them to be exported. Wild Style debuted in Tokyo, in Boston in December of 1983, in Los Angeles. And I heard many a person say that when they went to see that film, they then became the B-boys in their respective cities. So the film allows hip hop culture, which had been considered a passing fad. Imagine that, hip hop culture is a passing fad, something that developed on street corners and in New York City's outer boroughs and uptown. It allows that culture to become the global phenomena that it is today. And the artists in this exhibition are absolutely part of making that reach happen. Here's a photograph from the set of Blondie's Rapture. You can see Jean-Michel, who plays the DJ in that music video, and a Samo graffitied expression there. And here are stills from Wild Style, where you can see all the different areas of hip hop culture playing out. For those who are working with school children, I wanted to just highlight for a minute the fashion elements that are clustered at the center of the room. The room focused on the big screens, movies, and music, because these guys are supposed to sort of be in conversation, like they're at a club dancing on the dance floor in the center of the room. But they're also really wonderful examples of how these artists, in a very unfiltered way, took like any object, clothing being just one of them, as a medium, as a platform. So, you know, painting on old clothes could be a really wonderful art activity coming out of this show. I can donate a bunch of old T-shirts I have. If that's a route that you want to go down. So recycling and making wearable art, and making sure that that kids know that art is something that can be thought of as a way of being, as well as an object to behold. Here is a DJ table that we have in the center of this room as well. We hope to activate this DJ table through virtual programs with local artists involved in hip hop culture here in Boston, and then air these programs virtually over the course of the show. There's a helmet. You can also adorn a helmet with paint, as Basquiat himself did, adding to this this beautiful football helmet what is likely his own hair, making, of course, a very strong commentary on race and identity in sports, as well as in the kind of performative identities that one can take on stage. Basquiat wore this helmet himself to be photographed. And Madonna, of course, how could we forget Madonna, who Basquiat dated for a brief time. She is seen here wearing the suit that LA2 and Keith Haring collectively adorned for her on the occasion of Keith Haring's birthday party at a wonderful club downtown. Also, the technologies that enabled hip hop culture to really flourish. The boombox, a portable party, right, that you could have on your own shoulder. Keith Haring pays homage to the boombox in this wonderful ink on board work. And Basquiat, as you may know, served as a one-time hip hop producer to create this very famous track, one of the most important tracks of hip hop history, called Beat Bop from 1983, on which Ramsey raps, and Basquiat created the cover and verso drawings for the record sleeve. It's a wonderful track. It's absolutely available to you, as well as the rest of the soundtrack for the show on Spotify. That list of songs via Spotify is also available on our exhibition webpage. And many of the artists, including Futura and Fab Five Freddy, were involved in producing records in advance of the 1982 hip hop tour that they participated in, bringing hip hop to France and England, spreading the culture internationally through this many stop tour. And an artist like Futura both rapped on the stage and created this work on the stage. So the idea of multidisciplinarity and performance really coming through in this work created in the live context. So our next gallery is about the ideas around Afrofuturism, and it's really focused on Ramel Z as a figurehead artist. Ramel Z was the foremost, theorist of graffiti culture. He was responsible for developing the idea that graffiti as a movement was really a battle to take language back from the oppressors. So let me break that down. He believed that the letters in wild style graffiti, you can kind of picture these angular letters of wild style, could morph into arrows that could morph into missiles that could be used in this abstract battle to control language. So he was absolutely out there. This is a self-portrait that you're looking at now with his ideas, but he wasn't wrong in that he imagined that those who controlled the cityscape and the messaging that happened in the cityscape really controlled, really held the seat of power. So billboards, with advertisements, and capitalist culture take up a certain amount of space in the city, and certainly in this time, graffiti culture, with its very bold and large scale and expansive expressions on the subway, was part of a movement to take up space and to find an outlet for these artists to express themselves. And Ramel Z was really the first to articulate that. He is also known to create very expansive spacescapes. This is sort of the visual manifestation of his theory that a war could happen coming out of these letters. Here you get to see them more up close. These floating letters could kind of become spaceship vehicles in this war to take language back from authoritarian control. And he worked like Basquiat did, like many of the other artists in the show, on fashion items and in music to create this album in 1988 by his rap group, the Ghetto Vets. He also had 3 followers, one who was working in a style inspired by Ramel Z's work and theories, Toxic, who we have already spoken about a bit, and Cool Core, who is thriving today. I just saw an image of him creating a wonderful mural where he lives in Belgium. This is now moving into the second to last gallery, focused on the idea of bodies. And we really wanted to give in this gallery Lady Pink, the sole female artist in this show, an opportunity to shine, and she absolutely holds up alongside Basquiat in this gallery focused on these 2 artists, Basquiat and Lady Pink's shared interest in the human body. And we start the show, gallery with a large scale painting that Lady Pink makes in collaboration with the older conceptual artist Jenny Holter, who already has an outlet of a contemporary gallery platform. She works with Listen Gallery in the 1980s. And this older artist, appreciates the younger graffiti artists' attempts to reach a more mass public. Jenny Holzer herself is postering in Times Square, working in the public sphere, and she appreciates the graffiti artists' attempts to do so as well and reach this mass public via the subways. So she invites Lady Pink to create a series of works on canvas, including this work and this one also on view in the gallery. Lady Pink decides on the imagery, very likely referencing the death and destruction that is happening via the Contra War in Nicaragua at that time, which many of the artists in this exhibition and in the context of 1980s downtown were incredibly against this instance of US foreign intervention in Latin America. So in a very kind of cryptic way, referencing the death and destruction happening in Latin America, Lady Pink, of course, being an Ecuadorian artist herself, born in Ecuador, and she moved to the US at a very young age. And we have these two works by Lady Pink. Interspersed amongst them is Basquiat's first series of prints, Anatomy, from 1982, which is drawn directly from the book Gray's Anatomy, which his mother gifted to him when he was just a child, recovering from an accident. He was hit by a car when he was 7 years old, and he had to have his spleen removed in the hospital. So while he was recovering, his mother gifts him this book so that he can understand what is happening in his body. And that book becomes a major reference point for many bodies of work, this one perhaps most explicitly. Greg Tate, my co-curator, wrote as early as 1989 that Basquiat's images of human bones, kind of dismembered human body parts, were also a reference to Black male victims of lynching. And at the center of the room is this wonderful sculpture by Basquiat, which inverts the floor-based position of a shoe shine station and puts that on a pedestal, commenting, of course, on labor and power. And a nude by Lady Pink also figures in here. This is not a collaboration, this is just Lady Pink. And it happens to form part of Jean-Michel's personal collection, now his estate's collection, because he purchased it from Lady Pink out of an exhibition that they were both in together, of course, in a gesture of support for her work. The final gallery, and then we will jump to questions, is a exploration of the legacy of all of the artists in this show. So at the center of the room, we have Ramelz's Gachelier, which is a disputable in terms of the date. I think that this is an old date. I think it's more 1984-ish to 1988 into the 90s that he begins to amass this costume, inside of which he performed as a rapper. So it's a 180-pound costume that has a speaker system, built into it. You can see here on his torso, and he had a machine gun vocoder. That's a machine used to distort the voice that he would hold wired into the costume, and then the costume itself would emanate the sound and his words. So that symbolic battle that we were talking about with letters being armed for battle back in the Futurisms gallery that battle becomes not as symbolic, but sort of real in this costume, which is clearly armed for battle with these sharp missile-like accessories emanating from it down at the bottom and on the shoulders. And at one time, this costume actually spouted fire from its wrists and ankles. There's kind of these ports where Rammellzee could put firecrackers in the wrists and ankles. So very real, very ready to take language back from the oppressors. Rammellzee was, even upon his death in 2010. Rammellzee is in a bit of a face-off with this wonderful painting by Fab Five Freddy, Return of God to Africa, in which Fab Five Freddy, as a very avid self-taught student of art history, references this important genre of still life painting in the Western tradition, but inserts in it his own vocabulary drawn from the African diaspora. And this wonderful painting by Basquiat, enormous in scale, famous Moon Kings, in which these alien-esque or zombie-like figures are surrounded by Basquiat's encyclopedic imagery, drawn from everything from art history books to pictures of cats. And finally, we have, we have this painting by Futura called Robot with Spray Can. And it very much mirrors what the artist's own gesture would have been spray painting this work. So the artist becomes the robot is the artist, and the future has arrived in this work and in this entire gallery. And the idea of legacy, that these artists really were making something from nothing to create an entirely new culture, hip hop culture, which is, and of course, street art, which comes out of this as well, which are now dominant forms of cultural expression internationally. So I just wanted to end by pointing out, I've mentioned that there's a lot of resources on our website, our exhibition webpage, mfa.org/exhibitions, Writing the Future. And we created a lot of content, especially when we were not able to open the show in April, that is still available on our Instagram, kind of behind the scenes looks at our community advisory committee's contributions to the show, our research process, our design process. All of that should be still available on our Instagram account, as well as recent press. We were in the New York Times in May and Vanity Fair over the summer with our exhibition publication. And I wanted to just end by noting this incredible mural created by the artist Rob Gibbs, pro-Black, in Madison Park High, just a mile from the MFA, which has really become an arm of this show in the community of Roxbury. It's a portrait of a young girl who has a backpack from which her inspirations fly, including our book and all of the artists in this show. So her references are Black artists, Latinx artists, and she is absolutely the future as this young, incredibly inspiring and monumental figure and arm for the MFA in our communities. So I encourage you, even if you can't come to the MFA to see the show, to visit Madison Park High and see this mural and many others on its incredible campus in the outdoor context. Well, thank you all so much. I look forward to being in touch via the breakout rooms that I think we're about to jump into. So I will let one of my colleagues from education take it from here, and I will end the share.
Thank you so much, Liz. That was so terrific. Really wonderful opportunity to dig deeper into the exhibition and to invite many people to come see it in person, and certainly the murals as well. So what we thought we'd do with the next little bit of time that we have together is to take questions as a group together, and then to break out into smaller breakout rooms. So for those of you that are interested in or curious about something, I invite you to include a question into the chat, and I will track it that way. And in the meantime, Liz, I did want to share that we had a couple of questions come up around Hollywood Africans that I wonder if you could address. One has to do with the Oscar figurine looking both like what it is, an Oscar figurine, and also maybe a mummy as well. That was sort of one observation. Is that something that you found in your research resonates? Or is that something that you think with Basquiat's approach resonated?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. Yes, and I should have mentioned there are potentially not just dual reads of that figurine and every reference in his work, but myriad readings of his words and the figures in his work. So I think I say in my catalog essay that it is mummy-like, but that it is likely, we can only guess because of its proximity to that date, 1940, in the title of the work as well, more a reference to the Academy Award. But all of those readings are correct. I think that's the most important thing to note for your students. I think of Basquiat's work sort of like his encyclopedia of references, and every person that approaches his work brings to it their own encyclopedia of their personal references and things that they might be able to pick out from the work that even I, as a professional, might not be able to pick out. So all of those readings are absolutely correct and relevant to the nearby Mummy Gallery at the MFA.
That's really great. Thank you. And I know that as we look at some of his works in the exhibition, we see a lot of repetition of certain motifs, like the crown, certain references to those of his collaborators in his community. What do you make of some of the numbers that you see repeated in some of the work? So I'm thinking one of the questions that came in specifically has to do with the numbers 22, 60, 12 in Hollywood Africans. Is that something that has come up in your research much?
I hope that was a leading question, because I absolutely should have, like I said, there's so much that we can talk about in these works, but I actually really should have mentioned that number in particular, because that is nearby the figure, the self-portrait figure that in Hollywood Africans, and it references Basquiat's birthday. This December, Basquiat would have been 60 years old. So we are hoping to note that in some programming and social media. Yes, it's absolutely a reference to his own birthday.
That's great. Thank you. And I'm seeing in the chat that there's some really great references here to children's literature and sort of how to engage this material with a range of ages, in this case, elementary. So I'll let our participants sort of look into that on their own. And I wonder if you could also share with us a little bit about the transition, as asked by one of our participants, the transition to post-graffiti. How did the artists manage to get exhibited in the downtown gallery scene? Maybe you could talk a little bit about the emergence of different types of galleries in that moment.
Yeah, so I really give Fab Five Freddy a lot of the credit for being the conceptual driver behind the post-graffiti movement. He and Jean-Michel were going to museums a lot, even as children, and they had a context for art historical movements throughout history. I didn't go into depth on it, but in our exhibition foyer, we have a large scale photograph printed of Fab Five Freddy's Campbell soup train, which he painted collaboratively with Lee Quinones. And that Campbell soup train references, of course, Warhol. And then each can says a different artistic movement, Dada art, futurist art, pop art, and then he puts fab art and or fab soup and Fred soup. So he is literally inserting himself and his movement of post-graffiti into the history of art via this train. And saying, you know, oh, you people think this is like a folk art movement? Like, we're watching you. We're cosmopolitan New Yorkers. Like, we grew up in this metropolis. We know what's going on here in terms of fine art. We also know about comic books, and we also know about movies, and we also know about the culture in our communities. But we also know about art history. So it was a very conscious move on Fred's part, and he garnered the support, and other artists got on board with him. He makes a call in the Village Voice. I believe the date is February 1978, and he offers his graffiti services. I think they were charging like $5 a square foot for a mural. So he's looking for outlets, ways to get paid, ways to, you know, get out of the very dangerous context of working in the train yards at night in the dark, where you can step on the third rail or be chased by dogs or the police. And they're also kind of growing up. They're getting older and looking for ways to quote unquote professionalize their practices. So we argue that post-graffiti is one of the most important but overlooked movements in American art history. And I really think that these super young people who decided to take to the trains to reach this very, very broad audience, you know, were just absolute geniuses, not just as visual artists and their techniques and their ability to render images and have personal style, but also for their determination in making a space for their work, kind of no matter where they went, and no matter what stage of their careers they were at.
Yeah, that's really important to focus on that notion of persistence. I think that's so important here. And one of the comments mentions that, you know, the great documentary on Basquiat called Radiant Child is out there. And this participant excitedly writes that they're very pumped about learning about these new artists and the sort of scene around Basquiat. And it says that can't believe they've never heard of Lady Pink, who turns out to have a mural in Salem, Massachusetts, where this participant lives, which is really cool. So maybe,
I didn't know that. That's amazing.
Yeah, I wonder if we could get to one more question here, and before we break out into our separate spaces, if you could address, Liz, from your perspective, why do you think Basquiat got all the attention and the other artists around him are lesser known today?
Very good question. If I had shaped the history myself, it would have been a different story. I mean, history is not neutral, right? I think that the artist in the show, as the person who just noticed Lady Pink's mural in Salem, knows, the artists in the show are mostly associated with what is today called street art. You know, everybody, I would say, except Basquiat, gets kind of relegated to this street art movement. And Fab Five Freddy becomes like a hip hop music video producer and makes documentaries and all of these things more as part of mass culture and the movie industry. So there's these boxes that we put people in. You know, I don't have to tell you these very limiting categories. And because street art has been to date considered as so separate from the so-called fine art side of things, the museum fine art side of things, these artists might not be household names for those who know more of the fine art context in the museum world. But to youth culture, what is called in skateboarding and street art culture, the culture, are you part of the culture? Lady Pink and Lee Quinones and Fat Five Freddy and Futura are giants, absolute giants. So it's just a matter of what circles you are part of. And Basquiat did intentionally at some point late in his career sort of distance himself, not just from the artists in this show, but he was certainly tired of being labeled a graffiti artist. As were all the artists in this show. They were tired of being called graffiti artists when they hadn't worked on the streets in quite a while. They were like, just call us artists, please. So as Basquiat got really famous and really renowned for his work, you know, not just in the art world, but like he was in the New York Times and all these things. He befriended Andy Warhol, somebody who could relate to his experience and struggles of being this very famous figure. And he did distance himself from other friends and from this particular crew of friends. So there's a certain separation that I think maybe had to happen for Basquiat to stop having these labels put on him. And yeah, and I think the show is absolutely a call to kind of eliminate these distinctions between street art and fine art. Because as we see through the exhibition, all of these artists absolutely were influencing other major painters of the period. So someone like Elizabeth Murray says, I stole from graffiti. Like I saw those trains go by, they're incredible. Their color palette, their bubble letters. She says, literally, I stole from graffiti. And Frank Stella, another very blue chip artist of the period, says that he borrowed from graffiti. So we argue that that the graffiti movement, the artists in this show, inspired this resurgence of boldly colored, abstract, neo-expressionist painting that you see in the 80s. You know, following an era of what was very minimalist, quiet, four-square kind of dull palette, didn't say dull. And Basquiat kind of just becomes this figurehead of this post-graffiti neo-expressionist movement. And the other artists, most of whom are of color, are written out of that story for all the reasons that we know artists artists of color have not been included in art history, which is of course American racism.
It's really great to have you talk about it in that way. And I think the show does such an amazing job of foregrounding all of that context in a way that allows us to ask those critical questions about how histories are written and how these artists were quite literally writing themselves into the narrative. So I think that's a wonderful place to segue into our breakout rooms. And for those of you that don't want to join a breakout room, I think there's an option not to do so. So feel free not to as well. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Emily, who's going to explain how this works. And I will include in the chat the questions that we invite you to ponder in your breakout rooms.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Liz. That was such rich content and just so illuminating about the exhibition, and I think will really inform what the educators who are with us this evening are able to share with their own students and able to dive deeper into learning more about whether they go see the exhibition in person or go through all of the incredible content that's on our website. And I'll just add that in that exhibition page, there also are all of the label texts and just a whole wide range of resources related to the exhibition, in addition to those images and video clips. What we want to invite you to do now is to think about how this might look when you are back with your students. And you may hear some of my children in a moment who are coming by. We are going to ask you to think about how you might use these works in your teaching and what larger questions and or ideas the exhibition raises for you. And I'm going to mute myself now and invite you to go.
I believe that the mechanism for breakout rooms is beginning now.
We are back. Hi, everyone. We are at our time. We hope you had really rich discussions with one another, and we want to encourage you to continue to have conversations with your colleagues who weren't able to make it today. We're going to be making this video available online in the coming weeks, and we hope you'll share it and engage in conversation with your colleagues. I'm going to also invite you to complete an evaluation survey to help us really think about how we can best do digital programming like this and engage educators with our exhibitions, whether or not you're able to see them in person. And I think one of my colleagues will pop that in the chat. Thank you, Sophia. And we just want to thank you so much. Your responses to that survey really will significantly help us in developing future programs as well, for college students, for K-12, for faculty, for all audiences. We hope that you will keep in touch with us in the coming days. You can expect an email from learning@mfa.org, which will have a copy of that evaluation as well. If you can't get to it tonight, we'll include information about what's next for programming for college faculty, for K-12 educators. And we also invite you to explore other MFA Boston online events that will be happening and things related to the exhibition. For those of you who are interested in visiting in person, the MFA is now open. All visitors do need to have a timed ticket. And I will say that the Basquiat tickets are, you have to get them fast when the tickets go up on sale on our website. We wanted to also let you know that for K-12 teachers, there will be a special code that we'll be sending you for free admission, and university members, upon confirmation of renewal, those universities will be given a unique promo code to use to reserve tickets that can be distributed to students, faculty, and staff who wish to visit. They'll be emailed to the membership benefit contact with the institution, and if you're having any questions or trouble with that, you can let us know. Excuse me. We also just will mention that there is a $5 additional surcharge for temporary exhibitions, including Writing the Future, and also the Monet and Boston exhibition. University members will be able to access tickets at this rate with that same promo code used for their general admission, and we'll be in touch about all of this with you. I just want to thank you so much again, and thank Liz Munsell so much again, and my colleagues Celia and Sophia, and all of you for joining us during this very charged week, and for continuing to connect with the MFA. Thank you so much again. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.